Hi, I'm Kev Anderson and I'm a professional storyteller. I'm also very good friends with Fiona and Louise from Lindsay Lang. They have been clients of mine, and I would say, without fear of being contradicted, that they are very much now friends of mine. We've had lots of conversations about lots of different things, storytelling being one of them, and mental health being another. It's a subject that I've talked about a lot over the last 5 years and will continue to do so. The reason for that is that I've had my own mental health challenges over the years. And in this kind of mental health awareness week, I want to share with you something that I've learned that's worked for me, and hopefully it might work for some of you. Or it might be something that you adapt for your own purposes. I want to make it really clear, though, that I am not a mental health first aider. I am not a mental health expert. I'm just a guy who went through a pretty bad time, and over that time, over the last 5 years, I've figured a way of coping and dealing and managing my own mental health. And I would say, and I shared a post last week, and it's a difficult post to share because it's not comfortable for me to say it, but I will say it. I am probably in the best state that I've been kind of mentally for 6-7 years, so that quite significant. But that's not been easy to get to that stage. It's been a challenge, and it's been definitely a journey that's like any journey, has had its highs and lows and its ebbs and flows. But let's go back to the beginning. I started my business 5 years ago, and I started it because I had a stress-related illness. I was working within the publishing sector, and I had increasingly become aware of not feeling great. And that lasted for about 3 years, and I did the very classic man thing of tell nobody, keep it to yourself, because, it's not really the kind of thing that you share with other people. So I kept all these thoughts, predominantly negative thoughts, deep inside. I didn't confide in anybody. I didn't share with anybody. I just put on the best show that I could for the rest of the world to see. So for that period of 3 years, I would say I was a very convincing actor. But it hid the reality, and the reality eventually hit home when in August 2014, I found myself as a senior leader of a business, you almost bursting into tears in the office and feeling just this sense of complete emotional overwhelm, and I didn't know what was happening to me. And I eventually went to the doctor and was diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder. I was prescribed antidepressants, and I would say initially I went downhill quite quickly. I went from being kind of stressed and anxious to genuinely being depressed. And unquestionably, it was the hardest time of my life. It was hard on me, it was hard on my family, and I, at that stage, really didn't see a way through it. Really didn't see a way out the other end. And as I said, journeys that have their twists in the road, and they have their highs and their lows and their ebbs and their flows. And again, my story is no different. So I think initially it took me a while to figure out who I was and what made me tick. And I would say where I've got to in the last few years, and I would say in the last 18 months especially, is that I know that I've got this anxiety that's always going to be there to some degree, to some extent. And for me, it's about how do I manage that anxiety? How do I manage something that I know is just part of me? And I've accepted that it's part of me, and I don't see it as a as anything that's now holding me back. It's not a barrier. It's not stopping me achieving anything that I want to achieve, both personally and in the business. And I think the biggest breakthrough for me is realising that, use the analogy of the goldfish bowl. So, think about the thoughts inside your head as fish in a goldfish bowl. And those fish, if you've got a normal size bowl with the right amount of fish, maybe 2 goldfish, it's fine. But imagine putting 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 goldfish in a bowl that is meant for 2 fish. What happens is those fish bang off of each other. They bump into each other. They collide. And those goldfish are thoughts. Okay? That's the analogy that I use that helps me explain it. And for me, what I was finding was I had so many thoughts in my head, mostly negative, mostly self-limiting beliefs, self-doubt, and really stories in my head that went unchallenged. Okay, and this is what I call the false narrative. And the false narrative is basically the stories that we tell ourselves that simply aren't true. They're stories without foundation. They're stories that we make up. And, there are gaps in the story, so we fill it with whatever we want. And a lot of times what we fill it with is rubbish. Our mind's an amazing engine. Our brain does incredible things. And one of the things it does is it makes up these stories for you. It fills in the blanks. So what I learned was that I needed to get the goldfish out my head. I needed to get those thoughts and those ideas down on paper. So I want to share with you my kind of 5-stage false narrative approach that's really, really helped me to challenge. And it's not just a theoretical thing. This is something that I use, I wouldn't necessarily say on a daily basis, but I certainly use it every week, because as I've said, I know that anxiety is going to be part of my life and part of my future, and I'm okay with that. So, okay, here's the approach. It hasn't got a very clever title. It's called Kev's False Narrative Approach. So stage 1 is really what I call the early warning system, and this is just being aware of how I'm feeling. So if I feel anxious, if I feel stressed, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me to say, right, okay, I need to stop here and I need to think about what is going on. I know how I feel. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to do what I've done in the past. I'm not going to ignore what is deep inside me. I'm going to explore it. So that's stage 1 is identifying that I am feeling in that kind of anxious state. Stage 2 is what I call the story dump. So I grab a pen and a notebook and I just get my head down and write everything that's in my head. So what are some of these different thoughts? What are some of these different issues? And it's really about identifying the imposters. And I'm not talking about imposter syndrome. I'm talking the imposters, the stories inside your head that are imposters. They don't belong there. So I have been quite good, even as I'm writing some of these things down and some of these issues or some of these worries or anxiety triggers, as I call them. Even as I write them down, I realise I can see them. Even as the pen is on the page, I can see them for what they are. And it's almost in that simple act that I am able to dismiss some of those false narratives, some of those stories that just aren't true. So I keep on writing as much as I can to get as many of these things outside of my head. Then I let the rational side of my brain kind of kick in. So stage 3 is what I call the story review. So I take a break. I go away. I'll have a coffee. I'll have a walk. I'll go and check email. I'll do something different. Then I'll come back to what I've written. and usually I'll have a hot beverage of my choice sitting beside me. And what I do is I get some coloured pens or highlighter pens, and I just underline phrases or things that have emerged as I've been writing. The other thing that I can do is I can take a big red pen and score through the stuff that I have rationally been able to dismiss by just writing it out in my head. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's the difference between an idea in your head or a thought inside your head. When you see it on the page, when you see it in black and white, or blue and white, whatever colour pen you prefer, you can challenge it. And you can call, I won't swear, but you can call BS on it, and you can see it for what it is. So for me, it's quite therapeutic to just score through that and realise, no, that is, that isn't a rational thought. Now I can deal with that. What I'll typically find is that that whole kind of story review process is enough sometimes, that I'm able to kind of get myself to where I need to be. Sometimes, though, what will happen is that I'll dismiss everything apart from one. There'll be one issue that I can't quite as easily rationalise. So it's still something that's kind of bugging me, or it's still something that I need to explore further. So that goes on to stage 4, which is reflect and think, is what I call it. So again, I take a little bit of a break, and then I go right into this issue, this one thing. I put at the top of the page what that issue is, and again I just write about it. And I sometimes it'll be just flowing right, and other times it'll be kind of bullets. It'll be whatever I need just to challenge that idea a little bit more. So this is just going a bit deeper and trying to figure out why this particular issue is causing me so much problem. And I'll come on to a real kind of world example of where I've then taken it through this 4th stage and then in the 5th stage. So again, sometimes that reflecting and thinking, giving it a bit more time, again, I'm able to deal with the situation on my own. I'm able to self-coach my way through it. And in the vast majority, 99.999% of the time, everything is dealt with by stage 4. But there is a 5th stage, and 5th stage is very much an optional one, and it's called coaching. So stage 5 for me is where, if I can't rationalise it myself, I have got three different people that one is a friend who is also a professional coach and mentor. The other is a former client of mine who is a business mentor of mine. And then I also have a kind of a personal coach, a coach who I would class as more of a mindset coach than anything else. She would describe herself differently, but for me, she's become a mindset coach. So again, if I find myself in a situation where I can't, rationalize it away myself, I speak to a human, and those human conversations are absolutely magical. So I said I was going to allude to an example. So I had an example before, maybe about 9 or 10 months ago, where I was getting really irritated with myself because I wasn't able to maintain focus for as long as I needed. And again, when I did the first 3 stages of the approach, I was able to go, right, okay, I was able to dismiss so much. But this one thing that was left was focus. And again, I read a bit about focus and attention, and I tried a few things on my own, but I realised that I needed help. So I actually got in touch with Mandy Murphy, who is a coach who's based down in London, someone that I was introduced to from a friend. And again, I had 3 sessions with Mandy on kind of the area of focus. And the reality is, I shared right at the start, and there is sometimes a bit of a guilt, especially Mental Health Awareness Week, especially when so many people right now are suffering from mental health crises as a result of what we're living through right now. And I feel guilty for saying that my mental health is as good as it's been for 6 or 7 years. Now, I know that's irrational, but that's just the nature of who I am. I do kind of feel guilty that I am feeling as good as I am feeling. But partly, in fact, significantly, that is because of this focus thing that Mandy was able to support me on. She didn't solve my problem for me. She set me on a path where I was able to solve the problem for myself. So I would attribute the way that I'm feeling right now, I would describe it as feeling unburdened. I'm feeling more in control, and that does all come back to being able to focus more and also just manage my focus. One of the big lessons for me is I'm not the kind of guy that can, sit in front of a computer for 3 hours on end and just batter my way through something. I need to work in smaller chunks. I need to break it down. I need to take time away from the piece of work that I'm focusing on. So again, for me, it's about knowing yourself, and it's about dealing with the false narrative. So the false narrative I told myself was, if I'm going to be a professional writer, I need to sit my ass down and just write, and I need to do that all day, and I need to be able to do that because that's what you do as a writer. Now, of course, that was a false narrative. I can do it a different way, and that's what I learned. But the important thing from this isn't that one story. The important thing is that I think you can really damage your mental health by allowing these false narratives to deeply embed themselves. And the longer they stay there, the longer these false stories live in your head, the more ingrained, the deeper the roots become, and they take hold. And what is a false story actually then becomes a reality to you. And I think that is what's really, really dangerous, especially right now. And again, this has a lot to do with being vulnerable as well, and being honest, not necessarily with other people, but first of all, being honest with yourself. And again, being vulnerable, I would say at the start of the kind of lockdown, I lost 6 pieces of business, and it was all the business that I had coming up for the next few months. And I would say I had about an hour of feeling a little bit fatalistic that this is really bad and I'm not going to survive this. The fact that it only took me an hour is because I took myself through my false narrative process. I was able to engage my rational brain again and realise that, I'm actually really lucky to be in the position I'm in. And I know that I'll come through it, and I know I'll come through it stronger. I just need to take the deep breaths, take the learnings, and move on positively. So yeah, that for me is what works. Okay, writing works for me. Getting these thoughts out of my head and down on paper has been the most liberating thing that I've ever done. So I write stories for a living. I coach people to tell their own stories. But the greatest storytelling breakthrough has been the ability to become the director of my own stories and the editor of my own stories, and to actually challenge my own stories. And for me, whatever I go on to achieve will be down to my ability to manage my own well-being better, and to also have the courage to ask for help when I need it. So hopefully that has given you a bit of an insight into me, into my story, and into this kind of concept of the false narrative. I am not, as I said earlier, saying that this is the silver bullet. This might help some of you, it might not help any of you, but it's the approach that I've used. It's the approach that's worked for me. One thing I would say is that the lesson that I've learned is that you can't ignore how you feel. So please don't ignore how you feel. For me, there shouldn't be mental health awareness weeks or days. We should be constantly vigilant and constantly talking about mental health, talking about how we're feeling, talking about how we're coping, because for me it's the biggest failure of our society that it is still a taboo. It is still a subject that people connect to weakness, whereas I believe being able to talk about your own mental health, being able to tackle your own mental health head on, is actually one of the greatest human strengths that you can have. So as this, Mental Health Awareness Week goes on, as your own, mental health and mental well-being journey goes along, I wish you success with it, and whatever approach you take to it, I hope you find what I found, which is an approach that works for me, and hopefully you can find an approach that works for you. I want to thank Fiona and Louise again for the opportunity to be part of their Mental Health Awareness Week content. I just wish you all the very best. Thanks for listening. Bye.